Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cleave podcast. This is John LaFront. And before we jump in, I wanted to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you weren't just married to your spouse, but somehow married to their entire family as well? Or maybe you felt the quiet ache of realizing that when things get hard, your spouse runs to their parents instead of running towards you. Today, we're talking about something that can quietly undermine even good marriages. What does it actually mean to leave and cleave? Not in a dramatic way, not in a rebellious way, but in a faithful, ordered, spiritually grounded way. Because here's the truth: many couples don't struggle because they don't love each other. They struggle because no one ever taught them how loyalty shifts when you enter a covenant marriage. This episode is about order, it's about boundaries, it's about emotional maturity, and it's about protecting the sacred center of your marriage. If you've ever felt torn between your spouse and your family of origin, or hurt because you feel second place in your own marriage, lean in. This conversation might change the way you see everything. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cleave podcast. This is John and
Ashley. Hi.
And we're excited to be with you. You can't maybe see in the screen, but we have a ton of snow for the first time in Utah. It's what you would normally think November looks like, but we're now in the middle of February, finally getting snow.
Yes, we're grateful for it.
But we have a great episode outlined today, one that we are deeply passionate about. I will say it kind of stemmed a little bit from one of the questions that we talked about in the last Q&A episode, and we just want to dive deeper on it. I think we've mentioned before, but kind of on our own journey, we have been able to kind of not deconstruct our faith and that we lost our faith, but we've been able to dive deeper to understand what God means when he says to cleave to a spouse, for example, or what role does the family have and what does it play? And so we're going to dive into that a little bit from a doctrinal perspective, but also share some personal experiences and then some advice and best practices for how we can best do this. But as we get started, and before I kind of turn it over to Ash, a few different questions for you to contemplate as we go through this episode. The first one is, have you ever felt like you weren't just married to your spouse, but to their entire family too? Or how about, what do you do when the person you love most won't stand up for you to the people who raised them? So if you're hearing those questions and you're answering to yourself, yes, I fit into this category, then this episode is for you. And don't feel shame or guilt or anything for that. It's actually a major problem, and it's a
very
big
common one.
Yeah.
And one that I have had to work myself out of.
Well, we have together for
yes,
sure.
Yes, so we have together. But you always had a much more healthy understanding of this concept. I had to relearn it through pain in our marriage and not understanding the divine order of God's laws, basically. And that's what I really love about this episode is we are going to talk about, all things are done in wisdom and order, and God has structure. And in religious cultures, especially LDS, we talk a lot about the family unit and how important it is. And I won't speak for everybody, but I know that in my own mind, Satan was very, very good at helping me focus on the family unit as a whole, even above marriage. And I would feel that tension, but I was so conditioned to do what was best for the family unit as a whole, even, from my whole life, a young child. I've said this before. I've always been very obedient. That's not hard for me. But, if any of you are rebel rousers, just know that even we obedient people have our Achilles heels that Satan uses to bring us down. And so every one of us have our different weaknesses that, and it's like, well, the strengths have a weakness. And so your strengths have weaknesses and so do ours. But I just felt like, obeying my parents was no problem for me ever. And when I got married, I honestly thought that now the two of us would just obey my parents together. And I had some wake up calls for sure.
Well, and keep in mind, for those that don't know, maybe this is the first episode you're listening to. So, Ashley is the youngest of 7 children. And as such, in that role, she was a major observer of behavior. And a lot of this was because that is the way the family culture had evolved all that time. So, you had
Yeah.
watched both spouses constantly going in that direction. It was what was modeled to you through the examples within your family. For me, I'm the oldest of 7 kids. I didn't have any older siblings that I watched get married. And so we were kind of approaching it from a new angle. And that's what's really interesting about our marriage is we are able to see a big spectrum of kind of being the youngest child together and also being the oldest child together. And hopefully we can impart some of that wisdom just even from those roles in the family.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I told one story on the last episode, and I don't want to be super repetitive. It's where we were supposed to go to dinner at my parents'. John was sick. I was panicked about telling them that we wouldn't be there because, again, I'm the youngest. I had heard the different things they would say about the couples who didn't show up to Sunday dinner or any other place that they were expected to. And I did not want to be on that end of their criticism. And so John had to just say to me, Ashley, why is it that when it comes to doing what's best for your parents and what's best for me, like you'll choose your parents every time. And, we covenanted to put each other first. And I just felt that deeply. I felt the Spirit witness to me that that was true. I had never even thought about marriage and what my covenant actually meant. I had never thought about it in those terms, which is bizarre and laughable and all the things. But when you are so conditioned to think one way, you just kind of miss really obvious things. And so that was where my eyes started to open a little bit, but it took me years to be able to fully do this. At one point, we moved to Portland, Oregon after we had our third child, and it was really the first time I had lived away from home. And I noticed that John and I would get along really, really well when we were at home. But then when we would come to Utah and be on vacation for either during the summer or at Christmas, we would kind of just like be holding in a lot. And then we would end up getting in these epic fights after we got home. And I started to see this as a pattern. And as I started to look at like what's behind it, it was really you feeling like I have so few vacation days during the year. And when I do have them, we have to go visit family. And then it's the family's agenda. Or one specific story that's kind of funny. It's not that big of a deal, but when it's like things layer, my mom had gotten tickets to a BYU art museum exhibit. And she was just adamant that we go and so excited. And, it's done out of love. It really is. She means really well, but it's kind of like you don't tell her no because she's done these. She's bought the tickets. This is what we're doing. And I'm such a people pleaser that I'm just kind of like, okay, I'll go. And John did comply for a long time, but eventually the resentment started building like, why can't we say no? Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to stay? The thing I struggled with is she would, again, best intentions in the world, but she would make every single meal. And sometimes I was like, I just want to go to Cafe Rio. This is not something that I have, so I would think tomorrow and I'll go for lunch. And then the next thing I know, there's a big pot of soup. Okay. I've made soup and you just feel so obligated everywhere. And suddenly you're not being able to do what you want to do. And that compounds over time, right? And we just had to learn. I remember calling my mom after that BYU thing, after we got home and we got in the epic fight. And I started to see this pattern. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I actually think that John has some good points. I don't want to do them either. I'm so used to doing what she wants to do. But yeah, it's not really fair of me to expect that of him. And he doesn't get a lot of vacation time. So I called her and I told her, I said, Mom, when we come to Utah, I need you to not plan anything. Like, let us plan what we're going to do and be okay if it's not with you. And be okay if then like we plan this and we invite you. But like, And if you want to plan something, great. Call and ask us if we want to come with total freedom to say yes or no. And in that regard, she was actually great. My mom really does want to do the right thing, and she can be humble and teachable. And I love those things. And about her, and she was really, really great about it. And things got better after that. And it was so nice to feel like we had the freedom to be able to do it. But even recognizing the patterns took me a long time.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that we implemented after that, and you kind of touched base on it, but it was any other trip that we took from that point forward, it was a call kind of in advance that was, here is what we will be doing and what we won't. And we'd be asking, okay, what things do you want to do? Because it's like, it's not that, yes, we are never going to go to the Carl Block Museum at BYU,
Right.
but it's when it's just thrown on you last minute and you didn't even get a chance to think about, is that what we want to do or not? And you really had no agency in it.
I love that you still remember that it's Carl Block 15 years
Oh,
later.
it's because
That was
I mean,
it.
it's actually a cool thing because it's
Yeah.
those very famous, pictures of Christ. So that's the funny thing, is that I would normally love to go to the Carl Block Museum, but to your point, it was this compound factor that just was. And I think the key here, there's a couple thoughts that I have. One is, notice how we as humans react when our agency is taken away from us. One of the greatest gifts that God gave us in coming to earth was to be able to exercise our agency. And in family systems, that agency can be taken away because decisions are then made for you. And as you grow and mature and you create your own family unit, when that agency is still taken away, that is where you have in your body this like revolting feeling. And that's God given because it's out of order and it's not what we came to earth to do. And what ends up happening is that parents in religious communities especially then latch on to commandments like honor thy father and thy mother, and then they start using that to take away your agency and to inflict power and control.
Well,
And
they just kind of want you to comply with what they want. They're used to it. It's not even done maliciously most of the time.
And look, when you are a child, there's times where it's like, sorry, kids, you're coming with us. Why? Because you're still a child. And that is the responsibility of the parents. But once you have become an adult, and especially when you have entered a marriage covenant with somebody else, that is when that absolutely needs to stop. And that is where it gets really muddy and mucky, and it can wreak so much havoc in the marriage unit. And I think that that's what we have seen as we have talked to so many of you, that you're struggling with this. You love your spouse, but your spouse is prioritizing their family of origin. So let's just kind of go through some ground principles here from the gospel. So let's go all the way back to the book of Genesis. And this is the origin story or idea behind our whole platform, is this leave and cleave concept. Very basic scripture found in Genesis 2:24. And it says what? Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And that is it in its simplicity. And what does that unison look like? And so when you're kind of going through this and you're trying to figure out what is doctrine here, it's really important to understand the distinction. Your parents, when you get married, are now considered your family of origin. And that is different than your spouse, who is now family of covenant. And origin and covenant do have different meanings and different priorities. And I think when you look at cleaving, yes, it is exclusive loyalty. And that is that you try your best to function. You collaborate with one another. It's not that I'm going to tell now Ashley what to do, but we function as a unit, and then we have each other's back. If we both decide we're not going to go to the Carl Block Museum, then we both are deciding we're not going to the Carl Block Museum because it's not in the best interest of our family. Or we may be totally okay with Ashley's going to go and I'm going to stay behind, and we're cool with that. I don't care if my mother-in-law is upset that I decided not to go. As long as Ashley and I are on the same page, then that is the loyalty that we have to one another. And what ends up happening, like she was explaining before, is that it was for us, Ashley kind of coming to me and being like, but my parents asked us to do this, so we're therefore going to do it. And that's where it's out of order, is that it wasn't ever coming in a collaborative, how should we use our agency together? It was more of a command almost, or
Yeah.
like a duty and responsibility and an obligation. And that just brings resentment feelings.
Yeah. Well, and I would say families can vary on this. Again, it was not ill intended, but what ended up happening in my family, it was like, well, everyone's coming. Everyone's coming. They really like to move as kind of a herd. Everybody, they like to try to get as many people to do things as possible. And it's put strain on every single marriage. But you just kind of feel that tension to go or not go. And even ultimately, like if you say, I'm not going, it's not like they would throw the world's biggest fit, but there's a lot of stress involved in ultimately saying no, that you're just constantly feeling that. And what you learn when you learn to prioritize a marriage is you've now created a new family, there is the loyalty should be there. And it's not a bad thing. It's just a reordering. It's not rejection of the family of origin. It's just a reordering. And now this is my new priority. But it is so hard for so many of us to do this with the families that we have come from. And there is such a tug of war on our hearts and our loyalties. And the thing that I've learned is if a spouse won't set boundaries with parents, then there is kind of that war for like, where's your loyalty? Where does the loyalty belong? And at the end of the day, no marriage will survive that fight. It just won't. If you are struggling with your marriage and there is not full loyalty, start there, because a lack of loyalty to the marriage with family or even friends or whatever, that is your first problem.
And I don't want to be dramatic with this, but I do think to a certain extent it is an act of betrayal to your spouse that can cut just as deep as any betrayal, especially if it compounds over time. If a spouse is just choosing their parents or their mom or whatever over and over and over again, they're calling them to share good news. They're, doing this, that, and the other. They're subtle things, but with time, it shows where their loyalty is. And it's that they would much rather be with their parents than with their spouse. And if you're ever in that predicament where you're feeling that, you're in the process of betraying, I think. And again, I'm speaking more high level, but it can hurt as a spouse over and over and over again when that happens. And some things are not spoken, they're just felt. And you can tell when your spouse is choosing their parents over them. And, it can look really subtle. And I think, we have what does it look like when it is subtle? It might be, a parent constantly giving their advice without asking if we want the advice, or us asking them if they want advice. They just impose it upon you, right?
Or even one spouse constantly asking their parents for advice over working it out with the spouse.
And when you make a decision, it's, well, let's go with what my dad said, as opposed to what did you both decide as a companionship together, right?
Yeah. And just a little aha. Again, this could just be my experience, but as somebody who was wired to be very, very loyal to the family of origin, I think that God very intentionally and purposefully put decisions in our path that the right decision was the decision that we would make together. And what my parents would say about it was not the right decision. Like he wants us to learn to do this. And it's not like everything is some big test, but I think at the end of the day, the covenant has the power of revelation for your lives, not your parents' opinion.
Well,
and you've got
who else
that.
do you covenant with? It's you covenant to each other as husband and wife, but we are covenanting with God. So the decisions that need to be made is that body, right? It is husband, wife, and God. Now, we may go and ask advice from other people, and that is information that can help guide the revelation that we ultimately decide to do. But if we are leaning too heavily, then we're not maturing spiritually or emotionally or relationally with one another. We're staying stuck in a very emotionally immature place. And that is where it then continues to wreak havoc. So it can start small. And one of the things we want to emphasize too is families don't realize they're doing this. It's not like parents go, oh, I'm going to manipulate these adult children into my way. Like they have no idea that they're doing it. And
yeah, a lot of times their intentions are good. They feel like they're being generous, they're sacrificing.
yeah.
So, yeah, it can all feel good. But if you don't understand the order, it gets out of whack really fast without you even knowing. And this is why we need discernment.
And it's just so important for you to kind of grab the reins of this very early on in your marriage. And if we have any young listeners or even parents that have adult children that are getting married, I think it needs to be set on this path from the get-go, because then as time goes on, if you're allowing these parents to continue to overimpose into the marriage, and that happens over the course of years, and in our case, it happened at least for 10 years before we kind of started becoming aware of it and how it was wreaking havoc on us. And then it ultimately reached a breaking point about 3 or 4 years ago. But if we would have established these boundaries and really put the boundary around our marriage, this sacred covenant relationship, the parents would have respected that, I think, from the beginning. But because we didn't implement boundaries, the parents then naturally took advantage of it. And that is the beauty of boundaries, is that you can visualize what that looks like. And a lot of therapists talk about the whole concept of a house and putting a fence there. And how do you feel if someone just goes over the fence? One of a recent interaction, too, that we had with my mother-in-law, she was the type that would just open the door and walk right in. And that didn't matter if we were staying at their house and we were in our bedroom that didn't have a lock on it, where she would just open the door and walk right in. And it didn't matter what I was wearing or not wearing.
Let's just say John was in his underwear laying
Yeah.
on the bed, and she comes right up and she's having a full-blown conversation on his side of the bed while he's just
Sitting
laying
next
there.
to me. Yeah.
And at that time, like, I didn't say anything because this is just kind of who she is. And she's just happy and ready to connect and, but like she walks out and I was like, sorry, like, is that as awkward for you as it was for me? And he's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that.
So they're kind of funny things, and it's not
Yeah.
like that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But there were even
No.
times in kind of our more estranged relationship where she has just walked right into our house without even ringing the doorbell. And it's like, that feels like a massive violation of boundaries to us now, for certain. But years ago, we would have always just been totally cool with that. And it's like, again, small, maybe subtle, but then with time, as you allow the family system to exist that way, it becomes worse and worse as time goes on. So
Well,
then,
and look, sometimes there are relationships that they can walk through your door and you're both totally cool with that. So,
right. If
we're
you're
not
okay, if
saying-
that's the boundary that,
Yeah,
exactly.
But you just have to pay attention to when are boundaries really being crossed, and how do you both feel about it? I just wanted to jump forward in why this is so important. We've now gotten to a point where we honor the way each other feel about everything. If we get invited to a Sunday dinner at a siblings or, John's mom or whatever, it's, hey, we got this invite. Do you want to go? How do you feel about it? And like, if one person says no, then we're just kind of like, okay, we won't go. And, we don't do this like tit for tat.
Yeah.
I'm going to say no to control thing. I think that sometimes would happen. Not often. We didn't often get stuck there, but I think it can when you're fighting for control because boundaries aren't established. But it's like, we are genuinely at a point where, like, we love our family. We want to build good relationships. We will, on both sides where we can. So, like, we're going to go if we can. But if we really, like, aren't in the mood or don't want to, we'll just be like, oh, okay, you don't want to go? I'll tell them no for this time. Like, maybe next week will work or whatever. I
But
also
the key
liked,
there, though, too, is that we no longer have those feelings of resentment towards each other because we don't have the tit for tat. And I would say early on in our marriage, there was a little bit more of a tit for tat of my
Yeah.
family versus your
Yeah.
family in the extended case. But remember this, this is a truth that you need to remember and really compound in your brain. If you have feelings of resentment, what does that mean, honey?
A boundary is being crossed.
A boundary is being crossed. And so if
And
you
it's your
have,
responsibility to speak up.
it is. And so if you are feeling feelings of resentment towards anyone, but certainly towards your spouse especially, then that is where you need to give a really good hard look at this and say, what boundaries do we need to get in place so that we can both feel safe and heard and valued and loved, and that we can make unifying decisions
Yeah.
together.
And you just need to be careful because, I mean, there are some points where I would resent John for not giving into my family, right? So it's not always like, oh, just I feel resentment, you have to change. But you should address it. And yeah, sometimes we need to realign our expectations according to truth and order. And if you have a really unhealthy spouse, this happens too, so we want to be careful. Like narcissistic personalities will try very hard to isolate their spouse from family, friends, everyone. We are not talking about that situation. That's a whole
Yeah.
different conversation. So, but I think it's important to look at because if you are a manipulatable person, you could very easily take this conversation and continue to lean into giving an abusive person power.
Yeah.
We're
That's a
not
good point.
talking about that. So hopefully, if you have a spouse that seeks to take advantage of you and doesn't truly listen to your feelings and is always gaslighting and making everything your fault or whatever, get help to be able to pull out of that. But yes, here we are talking about two people who really do love and care for each other. They might just be confused as to how to do it. And this takes work. And this is why I think I loved President Oak's talk last week at BYU. He talked so much about humility. And what is humility at the end of the day? It is the awareness that we don't know everything and we need to be teachable. And if nothing else, we need to be teachable, of course, like to the Lord. He has many things to teach us, but also to just be able to listen in our marriages and just think and be able to change what we've always thought. That is the definition of humility. And it takes work to do it. It's hard and scary to deconstruct what I've always been, who I've always been for my family, and now I'm going to be something different and honor this relationship. I don't even know what that looks like for me. I've only known a life where I put my parents' needs first and I get a lot of validation from that and that tells me that I'm good. So now you're telling me that I can't have that anymore and that I need to learn to disappoint them to put this first. I had a lot of tug of war of like wondering, is John controlling me? Is he wrong? Am I a
Well,
doormat
and
if
as you
I
started
listen?
changing, that was the accusations that came from your family, was that
Yeah.
John was controlling Ashley,
Mm-hmm.
when it was really just Ashley wanting to step into the boundaries that we needed to help protect
Yeah.
ourselves in our marriage, because it wasn't just me feeling that way. Like, to her point, she didn't want to go to the Carl Bloch Museum either. We
No.
both were feeling this, but she was leaning more into the compliance.
I would have
And
just never even thought to say no. That would have never been worth it to me. Like, yeah.
Well, and it was one thing that I said to her once. I just said, honey, I feel like your family doesn't even know you. And she was like, yeah, I know. And it was when that happens and you're unknowable by the very people that should love you, I can't even tell you the level of just pain I think that really does come from that in a deep place. When that's all you're used to, then you don't know any better. But when you do know different, it's a very painful thing to go, they really do not care about what I would like to do, what my preferences are, what I enjoy doing. It is what the family decides is what the family,
Yeah.
is going to do. And I think I want to just, compare and contrast the two different phases of this. In the periods where Ashley was a little bit more enmeshed with her family of origin and not in the major cleaving side to me as her spouse, that felt to me, I had emotions of depression. Like I felt like I was a shell of myself. I felt more empty. I felt more lonely. And it was just more painful. On the flip side, when Ashley and I are cleaving to one another and we have that sacred boundary around us, then it feels like it's us against the world and I can do absolutely anything. And the happiness and the joy is beyond description.
Yeah.
Um,
And for me too,
yeah.
because I finally understand the wisdom and order and I'm no longer conflicted. It's so amazing that when you start doing things in the right order, I can have people be mad at me for it, but I don't care because the spirit of truth exists
Mhm.
because the order is right. And that gives you a lot of strength. It makes you strong and it's part of that strength that comes through Christ can
And,
now be there.
and I think it's important then to look at, we always talk about how all emotions are good because they are signaling to you what's right and in alignment with God and his laws and what is not. So if you're feeling anger, sadness, anxiety, depression,
Frustration.
are those fruits of the spirit? Yes or no, right? Or if you're feeling happiness, joy, love, that is, they guide you in that path. And so think about your relationships starting at the very top with your marriage relationship and your relationship with God. How is that going? Then start working down the kind of the ladder, so to speak, because you have these different layers and rings of where these relationships can exist. But if it's not good at the center and kind of that nucleus, then everything else really is going to suffer.
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to touch on okay, if somebody's listening and they're like, this is me, I am in this pattern with my spouse, my spouse can't stop putting their family first. What do I do about it? I have some thoughts, but what are your thoughts? Like, what's practical advice that you can give to somebody who's feeling like, how do I get out of this? My spouse doesn't see it. What do I do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, awareness and even just stating it is like step one because it becomes real at that point. I think we can often live in denial, and because it's going to make us uncomfortable to actually have to face it. And so just recognizing it, I think, is step one. Step two, then, is going to be once you have, and sometimes it honestly may sound silly, but it does take bravery to talk to your spouse about it. And I remember there were times that I felt fearful, not because Ashley is a scary person, but we had gotten in a really bad habit of allowing family to overimpose themselves and control us for so long that I knew that having to bring that to her attention to actually state it in a kind and loving way as best as I can, I knew it may not go well at the beginning, and that is scary. And so sometimes I think spouses then feel stuck. They don't want to rock the boat. They want to keep the peace, even within their marriage. And so then you have to get the bravery to be able to put words to this and to be able to express yourself in an honest place. And if you can't even do that, then you need
Yeah.
some therapy to help you with
And
that.
I will say, I mean, just in keeping with the honest conversations, that fear of approaching me in love often did overtake you to the point where you didn't approach me in love. You approached me. You would kind of, I think, from my perspective, looking back, you would let it build inside you until you just exploded.
Yeah.
And then you would be angry and mad and demanding and kind of accusatory. And I didn't know what to do with that. I would just, because suddenly, again, I was wired to think in terms of like, oh, he's controlling me when that's not the case at all. But, the control is actually coming from those who accuse people of being controlling.
Well, and
But like,
what I would want to emphasize though too is me withholding and not doing it is also not loving and it is
yeah,
not kind. And that is
well,
where you
that's the
get
thing that made
tricked
it build.
in your mind is you think that me not making her uncomfortable with facing reality is me protecting, her and helping her not feel those emotions, but it really is not kind, it is not loving, it is not what the Savior would do. You have to have those honest conversations when you know that things are not in alignment with the way God intended them to be.
Yeah. And this actually, I would say, of everything that you struggle with, this is the one that I still see to this day. And it's very rarely about family anymore. But like, we are a married couple. We have things to hash out occasionally. John hates to bring things to my attention. And I always tell him, I can take it. I don't care. But like, he likes to kind of wait until he's had it. And I'm like, you've spent how many months feeling this way? But I had no idea. Why didn't you just tell me? You know? And so it's true. It's not love. But like the one time that you did say to me, why do you always put your parents first? Like it was genuinely a question, but you were speaking truth. And I think we need to rely on the Spirit and the Spirit's ability when we're married to a good person to actually testify of that truth. Like, we don't have to go scary and fearful. It's like, I'm going to speak truth and see how it's received. And you know what? Maybe you need to do it several times, because often people who are trying to unlearn one thing and learn another need to hear truth spoken many times, and they might resist it at first. But just be prepared for that. But, for somebody that doesn't know how to go about doing this, honestly, the best advice I can give is truly just go to the Lord and listen. Like, be willing to do whatever he tells you to do. Know that it will probably require some bravery, but like, we are told all the time that there is power in these covenants, that they are the most important relationship on this earth. And we need to go to the Lord in confidence that he will bring us answers to strengthen them. And I feel like sometimes it's so easy to lack faith, and it's not. Like, how you approach your spouse, and some things are not an overnight change, but God will give us direction. I am so passionate about this. He knows you. He knows your spouse. He knows what's going to work. He knows what's not. I use it every time John and I get in a fight, which is not often. We actually very rarely fight anymore. But when we do, I feel that John is very stubborn. And I ask God every single time, what do I need to know about him? And there's two questions I ask. Teach me something about John and teach me something about myself. And he does every time. And most of the time, it's when we've both gotten to a point where we're no longer communicating in anger, where we sit down and we're like, okay, let's really go through this. Like, how are you feeling? How am I feeling? And then it's like, oh my gosh, light bulbs go off. These ahas of like, oh, I am still like reverting into kind of my childlike ways, and in ways I didn't even realize, right? And like, I don't know, I just feel like that's where tension in a marriage is actually kind of good and enlightening, because if you're humble enough, God can teach you where you have things that need to be strengthened. But that is true for both parts of the marriage. There is never just one person who needs to do all the changing and the other doesn't.
100%. And I think that what ends up happening, knowing that that is my default mechanism to stay safe, so to speak, and not that she is unsafe, but it's we as humans want to create this safety net. And so we will default to sometimes unhealthy behaviors. Like for me, it's just staying silent, and then it boils to the point where it explodes. We have to work together and say, what can we do so that that doesn't happen in the future? And it's things like, for me, if we are going out on dates, or we have discovered that when we go on a walk or a hike and it is an hour-long thing and we're moving our bodies, like Ashley and I will talk way more, and I feel way more open, and I'm able to express things sometimes in those environments because we have put in the time for that to kind of naturally occur where we're talking about it. But we live busy lives, we have a lot of things on our plate, kids being one of them. And if you don't prioritize the marriage, and then you all of a sudden become strangers in your own house, You start doing things that hurt one another, you're not talking about it, and eventually it explodes. But I would also say if you are in that spot where you're having those explosions, it's like any trial or adversity that you have in life. I think, like to Ashley's point, she will always then ask God, what's something I can learn about John? What's something I can learn about myself, right? That you can implement. But take those explosions as an opportunity for you to grow and progress. And it's going to be uncomfortable, but this is now the opportunity for you to be able to lean into that.
Yeah, and to listen. I don't know why. I just feel like I should share the most recent example of where this happened because I learned
Uh-oh,
I
airing
learned
out dirty
best in
laundry. She didn't tell me about this in advance. So,
well, I didn't even think about it. But okay, I would say the last fight we got in was last year, like middle of the year sometime. John was experiencing a lot of stress, and I knew it. And this is the thing the Spirit taught me. So when I'm the youngest of 7 children. When there was stress, I learned to disappear, to have no needs, not ask anything of anybody, not require their time, not require their attention. And I am very good at that. If I sense stress, I will go away and I will be fine. I won't be resentful. So I felt him really stressed and I just disappeared. Like I would just do my things with the kids. I wouldn't ask a lot about, him to do many things. Often I would think, I wonder if I could ask John to like go do this thing for me. And I'd be like, he's just so stressed. I'm not going to ask him about that. Okay. So, but to him, he felt like he was stressed. And at the time he needed my support the very most, I was absent. And so things boil over and I don't even remember what it was about, but you kind of came unglued and you were like, you don't do anything for me. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I am thinking about your needs all the time. And you're like, how? And I'm like, this and this, like I wanted to ask you to do this, but I was trying to be sensitive and he's like, your version of being thoughtful of me is to not ask me to do your job, which was kind of that rude, but it fit more into like more of my responsibilities. And I was like, okay, well, if you put it that way, it does sound bad, but I actually have been thoughtful about how you're doing. And I'm sorry that I've misinterpreted how that is to be done. Teach, help me know. And after 19 years of marriage, I should know this about John. But again, I defaulted to my childhood ways of like, I really think that disappearing for people when they're stressed, that is the highest form of love I can give you. That is me being incredibly thoughtful of you. But he is the type that he wants me all in on, just like he wants to feel like he's got support and a team. And it's actually much more normal what he wants. But it's just not what I ever learned. So it's actually really uncomfortable for me to be supportive for a person through a really difficult time because I don't know how to do that. And admittedly, I'm really bad at it. But like, this is the one place that I'm willing to be super uncomfortable and try and realize like, oh, I need to show up. And I default back to not showing up all the time because again, it's just not how I was wired to give love. I was wired to disappear to give love. And so, but the Spirit taught me that about myself as we went through that conflict resolution. And there were some things that John realized within himself that maybe he needed to restructure as well in his need for me to be right there with him all the time. Anyway, but it's cool how God really will instruct us in our marriages when we go to him. And we need to have that faith that he will, but we need to listen and we need to prepare for humility and discomfort.
And the beauty of that too is just knowledge is power. And knowledge, you have to ask the questions. You have to go through the difficult circumstances. And we've talked a lot about how to do that just within our own marriages. And it has to start there first. And then it kind of can bleed into the other family side of things. And what I want to say as we kind of start wrapping up this episode is we have a lot of compassion for in-laws in general. That is a hard dynamic to go from your nucleus family to then adding additional, even if they're the most amazing in-laws on the planet, your family dynamic does change. I don't believe that parents are any situation that we've ever had someone bring to our attention. You can see the good desires that the family has, but that it's run amok because it's out of order. And so when you're listening, if you're listening to this, you're probably one that wants to make progress in that arena. And I hope that more and more families will, but recognize and be patient with yourself that it is a process, and that previous generations, this was a generational problem because this is the way generations handled it. When you look at the way husband and wife even were in the 50s, it was not an equal marriage, right? It
very
was
obedient
very
based.
male dominant, and the woman needed to be submissive, and that is not God's way. And we have to course correct from that. So previous generations are going to view things the way they always knew. And it's hard to change when you have done something for decades and decades and decades. So be compassionate with those as you start implementing these boundaries, and be patient with yourself and with them as you go through that, especially in faith communities. There have been, and we talk about it a lot on our platform, but just commandments and doctrine that have been used for control and manipulation, probably not intentionally, but unintentionally, it has caused a lot of harm.
I wanted to say this a while back, but God tells women, he says, women, respect your husbands. And then he tells men, love your wives, even as Jesus Christ loved the church. So what kind of love is he talking about there? He's talking about sacrificial love that requires sacrifice. And, we know how easy it is to get in a downward spiral in marriage, where if a husband isn't giving sacrificial love, it's very hard for the wife to respect him. And if he's not feeling respected, it's hard to give sacrificial love, right? But when you start to change that, and the wife can respect her husband, men need that sense of respect so deeply. It is their deepest need. And having a husband, I can say that totally makes sense to me. When I learned that, I was like, oh my gosh, totally makes sense. On the flip side, I need that sacrificial love. And it's so much easier to give to each other when we're both doing our part. But when it's off, it's so easy to spiral down and not be able to give to each other, because it's hard to give from an empty well. So again, have the conversations where you need boundaries, where you understand and know where your spouse needs boundaries, where they're not currently getting it, and respect that and show loyalty to them and show sacrificial love to them.
Maybe to wrap up, do we want to just talk about some of these practical steps for couples?
Sure.
Okay, so we have a list of them, and we will post them online as well. But a couple just actionable steps that we've created. The first one is to have a cleaving conversation. What does that look like? It's simply saying, are we on the same team? What does loyalty look like when it's hard? Have that conversation with your spouse today. That's step one. Second is deciding boundaries together first. The third is using we language. Now, we are both individuals, so it's not that you never use I, but you need to incorporate more of this we have decided, especially as it relates to the family dynamics at play. Otherwise, unhealthy family systems will try to create a wedge right in between there. The next one is protect your spouse publicly. So take their side in front of others. If you're talking bad about your spouse behind their back, especially to additional family members, honestly, there's nothing worse that you can do.
Like, don't do it.
Don't do it. And then the last one here is just get help if stuck. And so that would be a mentor, a therapist, a church leader. Sometimes one spouse is on board with this and the other is not. That can take time. There are professionals that can absolutely help guide this in the right direction. And so sometimes you do need that. Don't take any shame on that. We've needed to do that, and it has blessed our life tremendously. So don't be so prideful that you don't go and seek help if you need it.
Yeah, totally. And again, I will always say the book's Boundaries, Changes That Heal taught me so much about what I need to understand and know, and the behavior that's in line for myself and in line with Jesus Christ's commandments. And anyway, so I can't speak highly enough on those, but there is help. There is hope. This is a really important thing for God. Every single part of the family, part of your children, their health stems from a healthy marriage. And so be confident that God will help you because it is of the greatest importance.
Yep. So my last kind of closing thought, if we were to just give one invitation to you, one action step, have one conversation this week. That's it. One cleaving conversation with your spouse and start that process today. It will absolutely bless your life.
Yep.
So,
okay. Good luck, everyone.
Good luck. Godspeed. Thanks,
See
everyone.
ya.
Bye. All right. Thanks, everybody. Before we close out today, I wanted to say this clearly. Cleaving is not rejection. It's not rebellion. It's not dishonor. It's order. And when marriage is put back into its proper place as the primary earthly covenant, something shifts. Resentment softens, unity strengthens, and you stop feeling like you're competing with ghosts from the past. If this episode resonated with you, here's what we would love for you to do today. First, follow the podcast. That helps this message reach more couples who desperately need clarity around faith, boundaries, and family systems. Second, please, if you can, leave a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple. It matters more than you know. It pushes these conversations into the algorithm so other people who are silently struggling can find them. And third, head on over to our new website, leavethencleave.com. In the show notes for this episode, you will find the practical cleaving steps we outlined, our recommended books like Boundaries and Changes That Heal, and information about clarity conversations if you and or your spouse feel stuck and need help navigating this in real time. And if you want a deeper weekly guidance like this, please join our weekly note. It's where we unpack these themes even further and give you practical tools you can actually apply. Remember, healthy families don't happen by accident. They happen by order. And when two people decide we are on the same team, everything changes. We're cheering for you, and we can't wait to see you next week. Have a great one.